Allie, you disagree that there is no gender wage gap.
Yeah, I had to think about that, like the double negative thing.
Yeah.
That I think that there is a gender wage gap.
Yeah, you think there is a gender wage gap. Jay, you also think that there is a gender wage gap?
I thought it was pretty well known that there was in a lot of industries.
Mm-hmm. Do you think that, question for you two then, do you guys think that WNBA players should be paid the same as NBA players?
I don't follow any of that, but I mean, I guess, sure.
Okay.
Unless you have facts
Looks
to
like you
tell
agree.
me no.
Do you think the...
I think they should be paid the same, but I think it does come down to like who is getting the most views, interaction, brand deals, all of those different things. And I think that's the same when it comes to the jobs that men and women are traditionally doing. I think it's definitely changing, but I mean, throughout history, like women were traditionally in the home, so obviously they weren't making any money. But I think that when it comes to being in industry, men just happen to be in more high-paying jobs just with how the world is. So right. I don't think that it's necessarily having to do with gender, and more so with what jobs
I was
we're
just more
putting
focused on the
into.
I was more just focused on the WNBA thing. So you said that the WNBA players should be paid the same as the NBA players.
Yeah, I do think so.
But you also said, well, it depends on how much money they bring in, right?
Yeah, like I mean, in a perfect world, I think they should be paid the same. I think that the circumstances make it so that they
right,
are.
but in the perfect world, there shouldn't be war, and everyone should be pretty, and nobody could be fat, and blah blah blah. Like, but I'm asking this question like as the world currently is. So like, it's kind of pointless to be like, oh, in a perfect world, the world's never going to be perfect.
I like don't think that it's situationally possible for them to be paid the same right now, just because of how everything is. So I guess no to that direct question.
Okay, and then. WNBA players, should they be paid the same as NBA players?
No, that's literally the exact same standpoint I have. Okay. Like, it's just not
And then what
possible.
about
I
you?
think they deserve to be, but I know the fan base isn't fully there yet, because I think it depends a lot on like viewers, fans, like how much money they bring in, selling tickets for games, like merchandise, brand deals, things like that.
All right, okay. Going to the gender wage gap then, what do you guys think that there is one? What do you guys think that is?
I only know that there is one because I have seen the studies. Yeah, literally. Oh, okay. And it was ages ago, so like I am not one to speak on facts.
Okay. Andrew, you want to quickly do a quick thing on the wage gap?
Well, yeah, I mean, we can dive into it. So the idea here that it's essentially just that for the same work, women should be paid the same as a man. The problem is that when we start actually running studies on this and we start kind of diving into it, we recognize very quickly that there's some offsets that don't really make a lot of sense. For instance, maternity leave and risk association. So if you were to think that you are in charge of a business and you have to hire an employee, you can find a male and a female, and they're perhaps both equally qualified. But the woman will want to offset for family time, and will want to offset more for pregnancies and things like this. Makes them a bit of a higher risk, which brings their negotiating power down. Really doesn't have anything to do with sexism. It seems to mostly only have to do with the fact that there's a risk association which occurs with this. And so it's just negotiating leverage.
Also, really quick, who here wants this?
I don't know. Chair one looks like she wants to disagree. I have no brute facts at my hands that you do not have.
I worked in HR and I just saw a lot of things about exactly what you're talking about. Mm-hmm. And like there's studies in other countries that prove that whenever you give the same amount of paternity leave as maternity leave, like morale and production rates go up. And so like if you look at it that way, if we had it equal, then wouldn't you have the same risk?
Well, in those countries, in those same countries, they create uniformity laws. So what they do is they say, you simply can't pay a distinct wage. But if left to their own devices, they will pay a distinct wage. But the question is not whether or not they pay this wage based on the fact that they're being sexist, but based on the fact that they're doing a basic risk assessment. So if one sex is more riskier than the other sex to employ, why wouldn't you, as the employer, opt for the sex that had less risk? That's what I don't understand.
Like you said, you have more facts than me.
I don't. No. I have no different facts than you.
Oh, I thought you said you
Looking
did.
nothing
I'm
up.
sorry.
Yeah, I have no different facts than you have. I'm just looking at it from the standpoint of logical assessment. So in this case, I'm just going to grant that it exists. I'm just going to grant. I'm not even going to crunch the numbers. I'm not going to do the math, right? Many people have done it. It's highly contested, but I don't even think we need to. If you're just looking at it from an employer basis, why wouldn't you take into account risk assessment when it came to hiring men versus women? That seems totally reasonable to me.
I mean, if you're only looking at that risk, then sure. And I know that this can go further and further and further, and so I was just trying to avoid that. But like, there's plenty of other risk factors that I'm sure you could look at that I don't have the facts on, so I'm not one to be argumentative about it.
Okay.
Final question on this, on the wage gap thing. Who here wants a guy to pay for the first date? Show of hands. Yes. 1, 2, 3, 4. Yeah, I mean, so you want the man to pay for the first date? Maybe just scoot into the table a little bit if you can. Here, I'm going to get it off that angle. There's a lot of reasons. Well, one, the wage gap doesn't really exist. When you control for all factors, it shrinks down to something like 99 cents to the dollar, as opposed to the uncontrolled gender wage gap, which doesn't factor in for time, hours worked, location, seniority, type of job, overtime hours worked, these sorts of things. But when it comes to this, couldn't you just argue, like putting all those other things aside, couldn't you just argue, well, okay, let's say 50% of women want men to pay for the first date. Wouldn't this create like enough of a mating and social pressure on men that doesn't exist in women in terms of a motivating factor, that because of this, men just are more motivated and they work harder because of the pressure that women put on men?
I personally wouldn't. I normally have like a way of, I will let a guy pay for the like meal if he insists on it, but I normally always pay for my own because that's only because for like.
Sure. And in addition to that, even though some of the girls didn't say like, oh, I want a guy to pay for the first date, probably I would argue, those of you who, even if you didn't raise your hand, even if you don't want it, you still have the experience of having men pay for the first date anyway. Would that be the case for you?
Yeah, because I always suggest like no, because I don't know if there's gonna be a second date, so I don't see why you should be wasting your money on me type shit. So I normally always pay for my own things, but some men insist on it.
Sure.
Yeah.
Right. So it occurs to me that there's a good probability, even if only like 50% of women, I think it's more, but even if only 50% of women want a man who's a provider, or want a man to pay for first dates or subsequent dates, that this is going to create a pressure on men, that you don't see this pressure being equally applied to women or even at all applied to women. I for example, I've never gone on a date with a woman with the expectation that she pays the entire bill, but there are plenty of women who go on dates with the expectation that the entire bill be paid for them. And so for this reason, I think just this alone would actually just explain the way the gender wage gap, men are just simply more motivated by women's own pressure on men to be providers and to pay for dates.